Okay, hi, welcome everyone to our first in-person mediation talk since early 2020. I know, wild. As this is an instructional space, I encourage you to remain masked when not eating for those in the room, or generally whenever is possible. My name is Effie and I will be your host. This talk is a hybrid version with some audience members on Zoom. It will be recorded with the speaker's permission and shared on both our YouTube page and on our Facebook page. So just keep that in mind if you're turning on cameras or if you're asking questions. Our speaker today, Billy, also recently shared an access check that she runs in her tutorial space with me. And so, leaning on Billy's teaching methods, I would like to remind you that access is a shared responsibility of everyone in the space, both in person and virtually. If there is anything we can do to make mediations as a physical space and as a community event more accessible, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thanks for that, Billy. We're going to begin with a land acknowledgement. In many Indigenous protocols, it is a sign of respect to share who you are connected to, and the land that you come from, while offering gratitude to the land and people of the territory you are visiting. And from these traditions, we come to land acknowledgements. The current practice of acknowledgements on university campuses are an attempt to recognize and show respect for the historical and current realities of the land and its Indigenous stewards. These acknowledgements serve as a constant reminder and a consistent pressure to include these communities in discussions about the lands for which they are the true stewards. Land acknowledgements are a time to consider our individual and collective roles in building relationships with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and our responsibilities to the land. To be meaningful and respectful, a land acknowledgement has to be intentional. This is the time to give thanks, consider our role in the stewardship of this earth and in building relationships with Indigenous peoples and communities. We wish to acknowledge the Indigenous people who were the caretakers of this land long before it was stolen, and the road to truth and reconciliation that still lays ahead. We acknowledge that Western University is located on sacred land upon which we are privileged to work and study. We acknowledge these lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chinantun nations on lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dishwith-Wanspoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the longstanding traditions that Indigenous nations have to this land. Thank you for your attentiveness during the land acknowledgement. And now, with great pleasure, I introduce our first speaker of the 2022-2023 Mediations Lecture Series. Billy Anderson is the third-year PhD candidate in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. She completed her master's in critical disability studies before turning to media studies. Her focus, however, remains in the realm of disability. Today's talk is based off of Billy's field examination, which is a hypothetical course syllabus for an undergraduate MIT course. It argues that film is a producer of and a product of the culture that it exists in. The cinema poses questions about how the unconscious structures ways of seeing and pleasure in looking. This project considers what it means to be an ideologically invested spectator of film and differentiates between what audiences gain through the acts of looking, gazing, and staring. It simultaneously argues that audiences form their perceptions of disability through exposure to film, while also using Cronenberg's genre-defining body horror catalog to deconstruct normative ideologies surrounding disability. The content suggests that body horror as a genre offers audiences the ability to subvert their understandings of what it means to inhabit a body and how we understand and form relationships with the other. Without further ado, take it away, Billy.
Thank you. Okay, so if you don't already know me, my name is Billy Anderson, and like Eddie said, I'm here today to talk about, I've been labeling it my monstrosity of a project, because it's literally about monsters for the most part, but also because the project itself is pretty wacky. So instead of writing an argumentative paper for my field exam, I wrote a course syllabus. And then I wrote a subsequent rationale document for all of the choices I made in the syllabus that kind of ended up being a paper anyway. It just was a lot choppier. Actually, while I'm chatting here, I do have 2 copies of the syllabus. Some people in the room have already seen it, but I'm going to send it around anyway in case you are interested. It's huge. I apologize. There's lots of pedagogical stuff in there that I'm not going to be getting into today. But feel free to look over it if you are interested. And then if you are interested in seeing the rationale as well, I can forward that anywhere. Writing a syllabus was very fun. but it was also a really awkward project to undertake because there was a lot of steps I had to make sure that I was following for a fields exam. So if you've been to a fields exam talk before, this one might feel a little bit different. I've been telling people that you can imagine that this is like the first class of the semester. I'm going to go over the syllabus. You are going to leave with more questions than you have answers. And then you're just going to wish you stayed in bed in your dorm. I'm going to apologize also for anybody in the room or over Zoom. You saw the title on the poster for this talk and got really excited thinking that you were going to get a lot of answers about body horror or about disability. Since I wrote syllabus, like I said, this is more of a course pitch than anything else. So there is theory, but this is pretty abridged. This is actually like an abridged version of an already abridged project. So the more cohesive project will hopefully come later on. So if you do have any pressing questions at the end of this, wait until like September of 2024 when I'm actually done my dissertation. And then I might have some answers for you. So with that being said, I just want to walk everybody through what the project ended up looking like. So I'm not going to go into complete detail for all of these steps of the project, but there are a couple of things that I do want to hit in my time here. I was going to start by giving a brief course description. Effie actually read exactly what I have here. I'll go over it again really briefly, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. The next thing I want to do is talk about why I picked writing a course syllabus, because this is a weirder project than probably most people are used to. And then I want to jump right into the content. So there are two preliminary things I want to cover, which is a brief overview of disability in film, which is what kind of led me to this project in the first place. So this is really important. And then the second thing is why I picked David Cronenberg specifically. And then following that, I want to get into more of like the juicier stuff, which is the main course content. I split the course into three main parts. The first one is ideology and subject creation. The second one is like an introduction to disability theory. And then the third one is more of like a contextualizing disability as a visual experience in film. So very briefly, because Effie already covered it, here's what I pitched. This is a shorter synopsis than what Effie read, but it's just the idea that this course is meant to allow students to consider what it means to be ideologically invested in a film. What you see on screen, obviously, is a shortened version. Like I said, I also underneath have some of the course requirements. This is the bigger section if you look at the actual syllabus. Things like prerequisites, so I want people to have taken some MIT courses. I want to cap enrollment pretty small. It's a hard thing to do because MIT is a really big department. So I have it at 40 students. The blurb underneath is probably pretty hard to read from where you are, but basically what it says is, since this is an MIT course, I do want MIT students, but if there are disability studies students that wanted to take the course, I would allow it, special permission. But this course really does rely on students not having prior disability studies experience. And I'll get into why that's an important stipulation later on. So this is a lot of information. I want to take some time to break it down and talk about why I want this route. So I'm going to do the route part first. Based on this description, of course, what Effie read and what's here on screen, you might be thinking that this would fit really easily into a paper. There's like one main argument that I'm arguing throughout, 3 subheadings. And yeah, you are right. It probably would have been a lot easier to write a paper, but writing a course is fun. I have a lot of fun, and it's cool to have this writing experience that I probably am not going to get anywhere else. And now I can tell people I've written a course syllabus, and if they mishear me and think I say I taught a course, great. It sounds like I have a job. There were a lot of other reasons why I went this route as well. Obviously, like I mentioned, it was fun, but I'm not going to get this experience really anywhere else. So I wanted to write a course syllabus because I'm going to have a lot of opportunities to write. I'm going to write a lot of introductions and conclusions and proposals and literature reviews, but I won't be given, probably beyond this, in the next 2 years, really any chance to write a course syllabus or to teach a course in the specific material that I'm interested in. If I'm lucky in my time as a graduate, I might get a job teaching and then I can pitch this course. But I'm going to get really minimal opportunities to teach specifically this research. And also the way that fields exams were pitched to me was that you are establishing your teachables. And the idea with teachables is these are areas of study that I'm an expert in that I can go on and teach in, a film department or a disability science department, media studies. And by creating a course syllabus, I'm hypothetically teaching the material. I'm showing that I have the knowledge to teach the material. So I felt it would be a really appropriate challenge to try to write a course syllabus. And then that means that I was also simplifying the material in such a way that I was teaching it to an undergrad level course rather than teaching it to a bunch of grad students, which is kind of what I would be doing if I wrote a paper. And the idea when I started writing a syllabus is that I would be less concerned about the word count. For anybody that's seen the syllabus is 20 pages single spaced. The rationale document was 35 pages double spaced. FIMS says that you're supposed to have a 35-page document, so I almost doubled it. So I was just less concerned about the word document or about the word count because I was ignoring the word count. So that's kind of why I decided to go this route specifically. Like I said, it was a lot of fun. I'm really happy I went this route. It felt like a really special moment of like learning experience that like I said, wouldn't get anywhere else. So there were a couple of things then that inspired the content of the course that I want to touch on. This is all really relevant to the course material itself, which is why I do want to take some time to cover it. So the first thing I want to note, and this kind of goes in line with course requirements, is that I chose in the syllabus proper to label this as a 3rd or 4th year MIT course. This decision was made for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the theoretical background I used in the text is already taught in undergraduate MIT courses. So I relied on stuff from like Laura Mulvey, Roland Barthes, Bell Hooks. All of that stuff is taught in MIT 1020. For anybody who doesn't know, that is the 1st year required MIT course. And so they're already getting that exposure before they get into 2nd or 3rd year. And so when they get into this course, they can just apply it. Another reason why I wanted to make this an MIT course, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is that I want students that do not have any prior knowledge of disability studies to enroll. One of the main goals of this course is to kind of help students uncover their implicit assumptions about disability that they have learned specifically from popular culture, not in an academic setting. So if this course was taught in a disability studies program, those students would be entering this course with the prior knowledge of, say, models of disability or a critical lens that they already watch all of the content that has disability in it. So by pitching this as an MIT course, the idea is that I'm exposing like a new group of students to very specific disability theory that's really practical. I mean, everybody watches movies. Everybody is getting kind of this exposure, whether or not they're specifically watching Cronenberg movies. And then they're going to learn the skills to understand how North American culture kind of influences the way that we understand disability. And so the graphic I have on screen here is related. This is kind of the most explicit portrayals of disability that you're going to see in film. Disability studies students will know these, and they would enter the course with this knowledge already. And I don't want them to have this knowledge because it's really hard to get out of this. I'm still fighting it all of the time because I did my undergrad in disability studies. So you're going to see disability tied to things like villainy. So you have Darth Vader on the side there. You're going to see it tied to pity. This is Tiny Tim. I picked the Muppets one because the picture's funny. Or things like inspiration or like superhuman ability. There's a classic trope called super crip. And this is Jake Sully from Avatar. And so, like I said, I want this course to move students away from this. And also, like I said, I think to move away from this, students can't be presented with this in the first place. Obviously, they've been exposed to it. Most people have seen a version of Tiny Tim or heard of it. Most people, hypothetically, have seen Avatar or versions of inspiration. The Theory of Everything, the Stephen Hawking movie is pretty similar, even though it's a biopic. And a lot of people have seen Star Wars. So they've already been exposed to it, but they haven't been told that this, in simple terms, is what's happening. And so I want to start fresh. I want students to know virtually nothing. I want them to have no strong opinions about how disability is represented. So how do I want to go at this topic, if not through these representations? Well, it is a very shocking way to go about it. And I specifically want to look at body horror. I think a lot of people's first interpretation of horror proper, moving away from body horror, is that it perpetuates a lot of harm towards disability, because the horror in horror films is often tied to visuals of otherness, visuals of abnormality, appearances that would terrify you if you saw it in person. And I also think that horror is known specifically in disability studies to perpetuate really eugenic beliefs around disability. There's eugenic assumptions about bodily form or biological inheritance. And these things have been really vital in the formation of classic horror's visual and narrative conventions. Eugenics is so directly tied to classic horror. And so what this course is pitching is that body horror I believe, and specifically Cronenberg's body horror, has the potential to kind of turn those portrayals on their head and use able-bodiedness or ableism as its sites for play. So with David Cronenberg specifically, who directed all the movies that we look at, if you've seen the syllabus, there's, I think, 6 movies listed on there. He often uses disability not to signify the horror of being disabled, but instead to signify kind of the horror of culture's response to disability or hostility against disability. So before moving on, just a quick brief on body horror. Different from horror. Horror is just like scary stuff. Body horror specifically is it's like a subsect of horror that intentionally showcases like really grotesque or psychologically disturbing violations of the human form, of the human body. And so by focusing on body horror, I want to pitch to students that everybody has a body. And so watching movies, watching films that kind of display horrific things happening to a body is a really visceral experience. When you watch body horror stuff, you can often literally feel it in your own body. And I think that familiarity is kind of what makes body horror such a powerful tool in storytelling. It often gets a really knee-jerk gut level reaction, and also to accompany a character as they're going through, all of this suffering is to get to know them really intimately. And like I said, it can often be so intimate that it actually physically hurts your body. Body horror does kind of sit in a weird place where if there's too much body horror, people become really desensitized to it. Obviously, we want that, but also too little body horror, and it can just feel really jarring and out of place when it does crop up. I think my specific opinion is that Cronenberg really balances storytelling with body horror, and that's why I think his movies are a really good place to kind of start. And then another reason that I wanted to focus on Cronenberg is that his horror films can be categorized as like meta horror. His films are meant to kind of consciously expose the inner workings of horror as a genre. He pokes fun at the politics of horror. So if Cronenberg's films are trying to, illustrate the potentials of the horror genre, a genre that, like I said at the beginning, is known for being ableist or, following eugenic beliefs or desires about disability, then his films can also serve to satirize ableism or to reimagine kind of our relationship with our bodies. Put really simply, if horror films are ableist, and if Cronenberg is making fun of horror films, then Cronenberg is also making fun of ableism. So it's a really fun interplay. If you're aware of kind of the representations of disability, it's really fun to watch, whether or not it's explicit. So to kind of get at the core of this argument, I have split the course into 3 main parts. The first part I have called ideology and subject creation. And the idea with this section of the course is that I want to just define ideology as a concept. Hopefully by 3rd year students will be aware of ideology, but often I find students like compare ideology to hegemony. They get all confused. Because it's such an important part of this course, I want to make it as clear as possible what I mean by ideology. And another reason for this is that by making sure that they know what ideology is, then they know how powerful it is. So they know what kind of impact it can make when they use it in a harmful way. And so the idea with this section is that I'm just allowing students to recognize how they are influenced by film. And also, on the other end, how we form culture adjacent to film. So our culture, creates films, but also films do create a significant part of our culture. So this section of the course, we'll also bring into discussion, and this will come in a little bit later, who gets to create culture. And so a big part of film analysis is kind of recognizing who's making films. And this is a really massive subsection of film theory. I read a lot of content for my fields exams just about like who's making the films and why does that matter. And so it's too big to get into for an undergrad course. That could be a whole course. But the idea that I want students to grasp is that popular media often works to kind of keep the world functioning the way that it already is. It doesn't try to create alternate realities. It doesn't try to show different sides of a story. It's really the same thing. The easiest way to see this is in Marvel films. You can see Marvel films have very specific opinions about masculinity or patriotism. I know I have friends in the Zoom call right now that really like Marvel, so I'm not going to say any more about that, but just think about it. So the graphic I have on the side over there, titled Ways of Seeing, kind of alludes to the overall structure of the course, which was kind of mentioned when Effie read the course description and when I went over it as well. The readings for the whole semester are kind of focused on different ways of seeing. So who gets to do the seeing? How do we see? How do visuals form the basis of relationships or of culture. And we'll get into this more in a second. So like I said at the beginning, this part of the course kind of just exists to let students know that they're going to be doing a lot of like reflecting on their internal sets of beliefs and values that they've created as a spectator, but also how those beliefs and values are influenced very directly through the media that they enjoy. So once students have a pretty strong grasp on this, and I can see this being the kind of thing that like I have to take more time on because it is a pretty difficult concept, then we'll spend a little bit more time going over like the basics of disability theory. I put basics in quotation marks because I don't want to imply that disability theory can be simplified in like 1 or 2 weeks of course material. It's really complicated. But I want to note by saying basics that disability theory is really vast. And we're going to focus on like a really specific subset of theory that fits into the confines of this course. So since the course is focusing on disability representation, and the students are MIT students, this is going to be like fairly rudimentary. I just want them to be able to like appropriately and respectfully engage with film material in a way that's not going to create any more harm or really marginalize communities. So in this section, there's kind of a few main points I want to ensure students grasp. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. When I took undergrad courses in disability studies, in first year, they present 2 theories. They say there's a medical model of disability, which isolates disability as an individual problem that needs to be solved based off of like medicine and rehab, things like that. Then you have the social model of disability, and the social model of disability says that disability is caused by external factors, like inaccessible buildings, there's no ramps, there's prejudice from other communities. And then when I got to third year, the prof that I was in a class for was like, we don't think that way. So I spent 2 years of my degree thinking that those were the 2 ways of seeing disability, and the prof was like, we don't actually do that. It's not that easy. And so I don't want to tell my students that we do that because it took years of undoing for me, and I recognize why it was done, but it was really hard for me to kind of grasp how to move on from there. And so with the first point, the idea that I really want to drive home is like a model of seeing disability that I use now. So this is the political relational model of disability. This model states that disability is a political category, and it's deeply connected to things like xenophobia, sexism, homophobia, classism, anti-Black racism, and a bunch of other forms of oppression. And that these systems of power that it's linked to both create more disabled people and limit the life chances of disabled people who experience them. And so to call back to the medical and social model, this model brings in aspects of both. Because it recognizes the need for medical intervention and also the need for social change in education. And so in my undergrad, they were presented as completely separate. What this model is doing is saying they need to both coexist. And then the second thing I want to cover in this section is the semantics of ableism and disableism. Both terms really describe disability discrimination, but the emphasis is on different places. And so with ableism, which you're probably mostly familiar with, the emphasis, it really emphasizes discrimination in favor of non-disabled people. So it's saying that non-disabled people, you should strive to be non-disabled. Disableism, on the other hand, emphasizes specifically discrimination against disabled people. And so it's no longer you should try to be better, and it's like disabled people should be eradicated. Both forms of oppression are very present in both of the movies in very different ways. And so it's worth going over both of those because I think it is worth making that distinction. And then more than anything, why I wanted to present these cases is because there is a lot of different ways of seeing disability in film, but these are the ways that I want students to approach any analysis that they do themselves. And so it's not about looking at how medical intervention could make disability disappear in film, but it's also not looking at how changing social structures could be changed also to make disability disappear. The whole idea with the political relational model and ableism and disableism is that disability is not going to disappear. And so you have to understand how to live with it, to answer to it in relation to all of the external and internal factors, while also representing it in media respectfully. So then this section leads us really nicely into the final section of the course. So this is really what inspired the whole project. So drawing on theoretical works that discuss the nature of looking, gazing, and staring, we're going to explore how each of these manners of seeing impact the way that we understand and interact with disability and disability representation. So I'm going to get a little bit more theoretical here. If this was a paper, this would be the entire paper. This is really the argument I'm making here in this course, but all of that other stuff is necessary based off of where I've decided to situate the course. So before I jump into some very specific syllabus stuff, if you've seen the syllabus, I have paired a movie or two in each category. I believe there's 2 movies in each category of seeing. So there's 2 in looking, 2 in gazing, and 2 in staring. If I'm being honest, all 6 movies could have been in any category. Some of them work better than others. One of them I actually revisit. So if you want to just see specifically where they are, go ahead. If you're familiar with Cronenberg's work and you have like really strong opinions about where you think they should be, I would love to hear them. But yeah, I believe that they can fit really anywhere, because all of Cronenberg's works really play with the curiosity that audiences have in seeing different bodies on screen. His whole gist is portraying different bodies, very different bodies on screen. So with the first category, looking, this is where you'll see mostly curiosity. So curiosity isn't neutral, looking isn't neutral, but it's not necessarily asserting power. And so the choice of using Cronenberg for this course is really just one example in how disability is present in films, specifically in films that spectators might not recognize as films about disability. If you've seen any of his films, you're probably not watching The Fly thinking like, wow, this is such a good representation of disability. I would argue that it is, but you're probably not thinking that. So at its core, really, this course is arguing that the average spectator, like I just said, wouldn't watch a Cronenberg movie and think about a disability-centered plot. But, you know, there is a lot of really implicit representations of disability, or like probably what Cronenberg would identify as is like unidentified otherness. Like there's otherness, there's abnormality. So with looking, like I said, is curiosity. It's at its core, I believe, being exposed to difference and just acknowledging it. It's acknowledging that differences exist. There are different people in the world. So this section of the course, if you've seen the syllabus, I've paired 2 films. One is very clearly about disability, and that's Crimes of the Future. And the other is a little bit less obvious, and that's Videodrome. So this section of the course is mostly just to get people to start looking for what would be like the disability in the plot, or looking for how narratives could possibly be about disability. So that's looking. Moving on to gazing, you do start to see kind of more hierarchical relationships come into play. Gazing is when an explicit difference between the gazer and the person being gazed at has been identified, just like in looking. And when we talk about the stereotypes of disability, like I showed, gonna go the right way. The stereotypes of disability, we often talk about the gaze. It's really like the unwelcome eye of the non-disabled person that kind of follows a person that doesn't fit into the conceptions of what is normal. So the gaze, like looking, is identifying there's a difference, but it's also seeking to label that difference. So whereas looking is just noticing the difference, gazing is giving a name to that difference. So disability then is regarded as things like abnormal, as deviant, inferior, and often even subhuman. And the purpose of the gaze is to identify and to solidify that being able-bodied is the norm. And so the gaze is kind of the medium through which ableism invalidates the impaired body, while at the same time sustaining its own authenticity. So like I mentioned earlier, Cronenberg really plays with the whole idea of what it means to be normal. While he really infrequently actually mentions the word disability, the only place it really comes up is in the movie Crash. And I believe it's because that movie kind of fits into what we already know is about disability. There's, you know, prosthetics, people getting like very classic disabilities in a way that makes sense to us, not in a fantastical realm. But he never really situates what would normally be considered as abnormal as abnormal. And so with gazing, I have 2 films in there. I have The Fly and Scanners, because I think that these 2 movies really challenge what normality is. In both of these movies, like the disabled character is pretty uninterested in returning to normal, and that is kind of what the entire plot is, which sort of challenges the whole identity marker of normality. And then finally, we turn to staring. So in North American culture, as we all know, the one thing that you're told not to do as a kid is to stare. It's a really visceral form of communication. It's, you know, it's our way of really emphatically expressing our response to other people. And contrary to looking or gazing, staring is both ways. It requires like active involvement. And so it's really just like a natural response, but it is a little bit more aggressive. And so I think that film obviously is a really perfect avenue to explore the stare because audiences obviously are required to stare at everything in film. And so naturally disability is just part of that everything. And the history of disabled people often is tied to like the freak show, which is, being on display, of being like visually conspicuous while also being politically and socially erased. And so for the final section of the course, we're revisiting Crimes of the Future, which I'll get into in a second, and Crash, which I mentioned previously. And so the decision to look at these two movies is because I believe, like I said about Crimes of the Future at the beginning, and just a second ago about Crash, these are the movies that are most explicitly about disability. Crash, like I mentioned, is pretty explicitly about like fetishizing car crash injuries. That's the whole plot. It's something we're familiar with, but it's also something that in a real world context you would probably find pretty atrocious. And so in this case, the stare exists to identify deviance not only in the body and being like disabled in a way that we can quantify, but also in behavior as well. And in the second film, Crimes of the Future, it has a whole thing about staring, both internally and externally. Sorry, I'm about to spoil the movie for you if you haven't seen it. The plot of the film is generally around the act of public surgery. The tagline is "The surgery is the new sex." And I feel like I don't need to get into too much detail about how this film really invites staring. Most of the film happens like on a stage with somebody open and characters watching. So it's inviting the stare not only from the audience, who is curious about what's happening, but also from the supporting characters. All of the characters in the film are literally staring. All of this is really important to know, and I'm kind of wrapping up here a little bit, because horror is really the only genre in which disabled people are regularly presented at all. And so because of that, we can't ignore it. I often find not so much in academia, but in like the film sphere, especially like the Academy Awards, horror is never noticed. It will never win an award at the Academy. The only film that has ever won like a horror award is Silence of the Lambs, which you could argue is like more of a thriller. It's the only movie that's won Best Picture, fitting into the horror category. So we have to study it. We have to know what it's saying about disability. And I think Cronenberg has a really neat way of kind of wrapping up the politics of disability without like hitting you on the head with it. If you are familiar with him, his dialogue is always pretty kitschy, but the ideas that he's getting at aren't. And so that's the course. Like I said, this was a really extremely abridged version of what I did, which was already an abridged version of what I plan to do next. And so that's what I want to do next. A lot of the work in this paper, in the actual rationale document, was like, this is what I would do if the course was real. And now what I want to do is like do those things myself for my dissertation. And I want to like analyze the films in full, which I didn't really get into, present my own theories of disability and ideology, things like that. After my dissertation, whenever that is, I do to myself continuing with this. And I have one of other body horror films on here. Cronenberg is really like the guy that does body horror. A lot of other directors will have like one body horror film, but they don't really have a full catalog of them. And also, like I mentioned, Cronenberg's films are really politically based, which a lot of body horror isn't. So that's why it was so great to have so much to work with his stuff. And finally, I do hope you already got it, but if you didn't get why this matters, I have a really brief summary, which is that disability representation exists far beyond films, far beyond films that are just about disability. Horror films so frequently show the political nature of disability, but that doesn't mean that people are looking to those representations to form their perceptions of disability. And so what I want to do is I want to look at those implicit ways that people are being kind of coerced into thinking different ways about disability. And I hope that even just being aware of the little amount that I did today makes the people in the room more aware of the ways that bodies are represented in film. And that's all I have. In the corner over there, I brought gummy body parts because I felt like that was really apt, and also it's almost Halloween. And also I will stick around to answer any questions. So thank you all for coming.
Help me moderate questions. So we can take questions from the room or questions from the Zoom chat while I'm holding my phone and not being rude, I promise.
Cronenberg is seen as bridging science fiction and science fiction and horror, and he sort of has a foot in both worlds. And the world, the sometimes coincide, but sometimes don't. I wonder if you have any thoughts on genre skating and surfing back.
Yeah, I think sci-fi, honestly, most of his films I might consider sci-fi and not horror. I think what makes them horror is like the body horror aspect, the fact that like a lot of people don't like watching horror movies because they make them uncomfortable. And I think it's because of like the gore. And so I think that these are sci-fi movies that have gore in them. In my rationale document, I actually like highlighted, because Cronenberg is from Toronto, I even said like, he's creating these worlds. Like I think in some of his movies, it's even clear that that movie takes place in Montreal, but it's not a Montreal that exists to us. And so I think they're sci-fi films, like kind of based in the world that we know, but really bending the rules of what can and can't happen. Nobody ever really reacts to things happening like, wow, this is, you know, the world that we know now, and this really strange thing is happening. So I think he does a really good job of kind of sitting between the two genres of sci-fi and horror.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's sort of a question about the course assignments you have proposed in your syllabus here.
Very specific. Let me grab it.
Yeah. Specifically, the critical practice process
Yeah.
assignment here, worth 45% of the total grade.
Uh-huh.
I think this is quite interesting, something I have never seen before. Would you mind walking through your thought process as to like why you designed it this way and what you hope to achieve, or what you want students to get out of it?
Yeah, I think the idea, just starting off with the basics, like having 3 projects that kind of encompass one big project is something I felt like I was really missing in my undergrad. You can often write a paper and then completely forget about it. And so I think with something like this, looking at like a single film through all of these different lenses helps people realize what other people are saying about it, which is not something also you normally get, to form their own opinion. I think especially right now, a lot of people form their opinions based off of content online, like TikTok or like Rotten Tomatoes or Letterboxd or any of those film sites. And you don't get to reflect that in the work you're actually doing. And so the idea with this is that I wanted people to do that. So not only if for anybody that doesn't have it in front of them, the first part is just a review of the literature. So I want people to go and see what other people are saying, and if they're talking about disability, specifically in an academic sphere. The next thing I want them to do is, I've labeled it as ethnography. And this is specifically looking at like user-based reviews. So if critics aren't talking about disability and crimes of the future, for example, are just other regular film watchers talking about it. And then the final thing is the thematic study. So based off of what they have learned in the course, this is due later on in the semester, what's missing? So what's missing from both the academic reviews and also the more casual reviews? I think it's a more informal way of helping people form their opinions based off of what they see online and what they're going to see in the classroom as well. And also, I will note, getting a class grade to 100% is so hard. You have to fit in so many little projects to equal 100%.
Any other questions in the chat? You can type in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We are watching the Zoom, so we're watching you.
Like I said with Frankenstein, the proto example of body horror.
Oh yeah, totally. Frankenstein is like the body horror example. The safe one too. Like I think the average person could watch a Frankenstein movie and not feel disgusting about it. Whereas I think something like Crimes of the Future would be a lot harder to watch and not be like, ew, I could feel that in my own body. Yeah, Frankenstein is a great one.
So when you were putting together that those 6 films, you decided not to use dead bringers in the disability category.
Yep. If I were to do it again, I would probably take out Existence and put Dead Ringers in there. I think it was just about like having an equal amount of films. And then after I was like mostly done, I rewatched Existence and I was like, it's there, but it's so like moderately there.
Yeah.
Whereas I do think the Dead Ringers is there a little bit more. I actually had like 8 movies originally. And then when I was trying to fit them into this schedule, I was like, that's a lot of movies, especially if it's like a half semester course. But yeah, I do think even just making that small switch would be enough. Also, originally in the thing, I had them all labeled as like films that aren't about disability. And one of my advisors mentioned Crash is a movie about disability. And I was like, yep, I know that. And I should have mentioned that it is kind of like the one outlier. Crash is very clearly about disability. You can also argue that Crimes of the Future is as well. But Crash especially is. And so I don't think that that takes it out of talking about it. It's just like, here's a more contextual, like you can understand how this film is like as other films, but it's more contextual in our real world.
Are the opinions of body horror presented from the point of view of a disabled individual?
Like you're asking if there are people that have kind of done this already.
Yes.
Some of the work that I did find was people talking about seeing themselves in specific movies, and it was almost always Crash or The Fly. I think when The Fly came out, it was like peak AIDS crisis, and so a lot of people talked about The Fly, saying like, this feels a lot like what I experienced talking to my friends about having AIDS. And then with Crash, people talking about their experience literally being in a car crash, but they were all like blog posts. Like there is not a single, as far as I found, not a single academic article about body horror and Cronenberg from disabled people or not. But yeah, there was a lot of blog posts. And I also found a podcast as well about specifically existence, which I think ultimately is why I included it, because there was one person that was like, this feels real, which is great.
I'm not seeing anything in the Zoom. Anything else from people in the room? Hybrid management is interesting. Yeah, I don't think we have any other questions. So thank you again, Billy. And I'll just remind everyone that our next talk is on October 13th, which is also Thursday at 4:30 p.m. And Avery Page will be giving a talk on imagined audiences, connecting the history and theory of American entertainment television production studies, and the debates surrounding post-feminism. So hope to see you then. Okay.
Thanks, Effie.
Thank you.